There's a very familiar phrase used in life a lot, and it's also used very much in theater. It's called the moment of truth. And if you're lucky in your life, you have one. And in theater, it's essential. This is the implication. Life is full of drama. Drama is mostly because people don't tell the truth. Drama is because we live lives that are full of fiction, that are full of untruth, lies we tell each other, lies we tell ourselves. Much of it is ego-constructed. It starts when you're very young. You create an idea of who you are. And there's a certain falsity to it in every human being. Some people buy into the falseness, some people don't. But most of us get caught. And the forms of lies we tell each other are enormously variable. And ultimately, if you're going to have resolution, something has to happen in a play, and it's called the moment of truth, when somebody finally says what they haven't been saying their whole life. And it is a shattering event. It shatters everything. And shattering for people can be either seen as good or bad. But it's real. And shattering is when all the falsity and all the lies drop away and you're face to face with who you are. Something that is incredibly painful for most people. Because who we are in most cases is not who we thought we were. Who we are is less noble, less kind, less compassionate. Who we are is full of doubt, full of fear, full of confusion. Who we are is a child in the wilderness, pretending to know what they are and who they are and what they're doing. And once that falls apart, once that falls away, once you are revealed to be a very vulnerable and very incomplete and imperfect entity, there's a kind of terrible gnashing of teeth. The problem with moments of truth is that they're inescapable. You can't get past it. You can do nothing but live in it or try to pretend it away. And it's very common for people, after a moment of truth, to spend a life in denial. Pretty much the same denial that was there before, only now more ferocious. People do not want to accept who they are. Everyone's looking for a way out, a way to avoid truth. And most of our lives are really about that. We're looking for some way to feel that this presentation that we are has substance. And mostly we know it doesn't. It's insubstantial. It has no real weight. Most of our relationships are deeply shallow. We put it more simply. They're not deeply, they're just shallow. Most of our relationships are untrue. Even people who live together for 40 or 50 years of their life can often have very little connection. In many ways, we're sort of like puppets. We don't want to see ourselves that way, but we are. My brother sent me 210 photos this morning of a wedding he just went to. And I just studied them. I studied the photos, and I knew what everybody was saying to each other. I knew every word they were saying. Hi, how are you? You look great. You know, you put on your weight, you're getting a little bald. You know, how the kids are good, your kids, my kids are good, life's okay, everything's fine, great to see you, goodbye. And that is the totality of their relationship. And they think they're best friends. I often think of relationships based on how long you can actually talk to each other at dinner. Do you have a full hour and a half worth of something to say to each other? And if you're really close to somebody, you'll do it. If not, after the first half hour, you're struggling like mad. What more can we talk about? The biggest problem is, one, you're not interested in them, and two, they're not interested in you. That's the real problem. All people want to talk about is themselves. And if you don't ask them questions and they don't find a mechanism for putting it out there continually, it turns out to be an impossibility to have a dialogue. So until you actually begin to care about another person, feel for somebody else, you can't have a relationship. And most of us don't. And that's one of the truths. One of the moment of truths is that we don't really care about anybody except ourselves. And we don't care about ourselves terribly well either. The shattering that takes place in the moment of truth reduces you to a core of profound discomfort. And it is, as I said earlier, inescapable. You can run from it, but you can't escape it. The true practice of spiritual life, if you will, the true practice of becoming your authentic self is to look deeply into the falsity that you've been, to look into the lie that you've been supporting for your whole life, to look into the shallowness of your being, and not to turn from it, not to run from it, but to sit in the pain of it, if you will, and watch what happens. And what happens is a process. It is a process of awakening. It's a process of knowing that you are like every other human being on the planet, that you are as clueless as every other human being on the planet, that nobody understands what's going on, that nobody knows what this is, nobody, that we're all in pain on some level, that we all live lives that are constructed and we try to hold together as best we can, and that most of us in one way or another are running from. And depending on how hard you're running from your life, that will be a sort of a depiction of how hard it is going to be to get to the truth of your life, or how much you'll suffer when you finally do get there. So if your life is a highly drugged life, drugged by literal drugs or imagistic drugs, thinking, you know, oh, I'm so beautiful, I'm so good looking, I'm so wonderful, thinking that you are loved by everybody in the world, that you somehow want to be loved by everybody in the world. There are thousands of drugs that we take. You know, alcohol is a good drug for people. They blind you, and they increase the blindness that you are and that you carry with you. And so when your moment of awakening, or let's say moment of truth occurs, it is profoundly painful, because everything that you used as a crutch isn't there to support you. It's just not there. If at that moment you can say, basically, help me, God, help me. Or say, don't let me run away from this. Please help me be with this. Or just sit and say, This is what it is. And you start to go into it as opposed to away from it. And what happens when you go into it is you start to feel it's sort of spongy. It's true, and it has a kind of solid reality to it, but the more you accept it, the more it starts to sort of break up. And you can start to penetrate it. And you start to go into truth. And there's something calming about that. There's something real about it. And the reality of it is so much more satisfying than the fiction you've been living. It's so much more compelling. It's so much more allowing and satisfying. And so you begin to go in and in and in. And then I've described this multiple times. There's a place that you arrive at when you go deeply inside that I call a portal. And when you reach the portal, you just push against it. And this thing opens. And then there you are, having gone through the truth of your falsity into the truth of your truth, into the truth of your pure being. You enter into this space and you know this is what is. This is what is. That it is the core and the heart of you, and that it is radiant, and that it is beautiful, and that it is allowing and accepting and forgiving and all the things you want in life. And it's at the core of who you are. It's the truth of you. The minute you try to grasp it, own it, explain it to yourself, dialogue with it, it goes away. And I'll tell you why it goes away. Because in order to relate to it, you have to separate from it. And when you separate from it, there's two of you, and that's the lie. That's the ultimate lie. The ultimate lie is that there are two of you. When you're simply in it, you will discover that you don't understand it, that you can't truly explain it to yourself, that you simply are this thing. You are this truth. That's the beginning of real life, real spiritual life, if you will. Because then you live from that place, not from the place of a constructed self, your ego self, but from the real self that speaks its heart, that speaks its truth, that speaks what it is. And it may not always be appealing to the ego mind, because sometimes speaking the truth doesn't sound good to people. Sometimes it seems like they're not going to like me if I do that. But the deep truth is, it doesn't matter whether they like you. Truth is truth. And as you become a purveyor of truth or a manifestation of truth, you live a different kind of life. And it's a life that you're really here to live. It's the life we're born to live, all of us. And very few people do. Most people are at that wedding day and night, talking untruths, speaking away, and you're dead. And it's like, what was that? Not one single moment of truth in your life. Not one moment. Except maybe when you were born. And that's tragic. It's really tragic. It's not the life one wants. It's not the life one was born to have. But we are born to move toward truth. We're born, if you will, to lose it. And I can't tell you why. That's part of the mystery. And we're born to rediscover it. That's why we're here. And if you begin this journey, something remarkable happens. In theater, it's called the inciting incident. The inciting incident is something happens in your life that begins this journey toward the moment of truth. Inciting incident is on page 19 of a movie script. I don't know where it is going to play. And somewhere about page 85 or so, you hit the moment of truth. The inciting incident is something in your life that starts this journey. It's often something unpleasant, uncomfortable. It's a sense that this isn't real, what you're doing isn't right, that something is off, that there's another dimension to all this, that you're missing something, that you're living a life of falsity. You may have I had a thing when I was 5 years old playing in a playground, and suddenly my whole head opened up and the entire sky in the middle of the afternoon became completely dark, and there were thousands of things spinning around in the sky everywhere, like wheels, not unlike Ezekiel, to be honest. And they were everywhere, and I kept going, what is that? And they were all right into my head. My head was that. My head was the whole universe, the entire universe, galaxies galore. And that's the beginning, when I knew something was off. Something happens. Almost everyone who's sitting in this room or listening to this talk has some inciting incident somewhere in their life that made them say, I have to meditate. I have to try this thing of sitting still and see what it does. Because somehow, not sitting still doesn't get me any answers. The answers do not come from the noise of your life. They don't seem to come from the drama of your life. But let me qualify that. Because the inciting incident is the drama of your life that begins the journey. So life itself is pushing you into this universe of truth. It's trying to get you there. And you are either on board and saying yes, or you are in a state of resistance. Rudy always talked about how we live in resistance. Resistance is fighting the truth. It's fighting what is. Truth is never absent from you. It's never not there. Every second of your life is filled with truth. But the problem is, you're not there, observing the truth. Where are you? You're in what happened yesterday and your whole story of what happened for the whole previous part of your life. And you're into where things are going to be next year or next week or next 10 minutes. Nobody is in the truth. And the truth is right here. This is the truth, right now, period. This is the truth. Whatever this is, the truth is you're sitting here, you're probably getting very warm. You're wishing I would turn on the air conditioning again, but I can't because it makes too much noise, and I'm sitting right in front of the air conditioner, so I'm making a choice not to do that. The truth is this moment. This is it. There will be another moment shortly in which the air conditioning will come on and I'll be done talking, and it will be a different world, a completely different world. And what you do with that world is completely up to you. But right in this moment, you are in the truth or very close to it. Approaching it or leaving it, depending upon your choice. Or you can just go, kind of, thy will be done. This is what is. We're actually living an entire life to arrive at a moment we're always at. And it's an insanity of sorts, because it's so hard for us to get there. There was a friend of ours years ago who said to Rudy in class, Rudy, I have only $90 left in my bank account. I don't know what to do. I'm so frightened. I'm so fearful. I don't know where to go. I don't know where to turn. What should I do? And he said, spend it. And I'll tell you why he said spend it if you don't understand why he said spend it. It's because until you're there in the moment, there's always an option for some way to avoid what is. That $90 provides you with the sense of, well, maybe I could do this or something could happen there, da, 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 da. When there is nothing left, when there is nothing in your bank account, you will be in truth. You will be in the moment. And what will it feel like? It will feel horrible. Horrible. And those of you who've been there know that. You will experience fear like you've never known fear. You won't know what to do. You will want desperately to escape the truth, but you can't because there's nothing in your bank account. You can't even afford a bus ride somewhere. What do you do at that moment? That's the beginning of reality. That's what reality feels like. Reality is inescapable. It's inescapable. And when you're touching reality, you're touching truth, the truth. I was on the plane coming back from London the other day, sitting next to a guy who had changed planes for some reason, and I sat in the wrong seat. And we were in business class in this weird configuration of seats, so we were about 18 inches apart looking at each other. And there comes a point where they allow you to put up this window that will separate you from people, but they don't let you do that while you're in the takeoff mode. So here we are just looking at each other. And, I could not avoid him, he couldn't avoid me. And so we just started talking. And I won't go into the whole story, but it was unbelievably remarkable and beautiful. We talked for 5 hours, and we told each other our life stories. And his life story involved a tragedy that is at the core of my terror in life, which was the loss of a child in a drowning incident in which one of the father-in-law was with the child, turned away for a moment, and the child drowned in a hot tub. And for me now as a grandparent, I don't know anything more terrifying. I'm always terrified when I'm with my granddaughter that something terrible could happen. The preciousness of her life is beyond description. And I don't know how any people in the world would live with a situation like that. And he told me the story of how everyone experienced it. Everyone. And how it changed every life. Some horribly. People who could not live with what happened, who lived in a state of constant regret, anger, judgment, misery, depression, on and on. And someone like him, who knew he couldn't avoid it. He could not avoid the truth of what happened. And it sent him on a journey. And that journey was painful and essential. And he came out the other end some years later as the man talking to me on the plane. And I thought of him as one of the few truly awakened souls I've ever met. And he had no language for it. He had no spiritual language for it, but he was that. He was completely here, completely present, completely humble, completely compassionate, vast in his ability to open and forgive, to love, and had an ability to speak to people in a way that was truthful always, that helped people. He was an enormous help to people. And those around him, he even was ultimately able to help most of them. And did it in some ways quite brutally. His father would go to the gravesite of this child every day of his life. And finally this man said to his father, if you go one more time, I'm never talking to you again. Because you can't carry this around. You cannot do it. His father-in-law, who was responsible for this event, lived in such pain that he developed, I won't say there's a connection, but he had got cancer a year later, 2 years later. And one day, finally, this man was sitting with his friend, and he says, you have to know, it was a former father-in-law now, said, you have to know, I totally forgive you. I totally forgive you. There's no animosity, there's nothing. It was not you who did this. And you need to forgive yourself, and you should know that I love you, and gave this kind of speech. The man died the next day. So it goes on and on. There were so many people impacted. But what I'm trying to get at is this man knew that when people said to him, oh, it was God's will, it was supposed to happen, he said, no, you don't get it. You don't get it. You can't tell me this is God's will. That doesn't answer anything. It doesn't release me from this. And that he has to live through this moment of truth because it was unavoidable, and he had to go through it to the core of his being, which he did, and he came out the other end in a state of truthfulness and honesty and He was a real person. And I was so moved to sit with him and have this connection with someone who was real. And I talked to another guy, this was a few weeks ago, and I mentioned it in one of these talks, who a girlfriend of his said, "You want to meditate?" He said, "Sure." And they sat down together to have a meditation. And the minute he sat down to meditate, had he never done it, his head exploded into 1,000,000 miles wide, and he went on a journey into the core of the universe. The absolute core of the universe. Everything fell away. He had absolute realization, complete understanding of all that is. Came back and is now having to go through life as an awakened person who had no preparation for it at all. He didn't meditate for 50 years for this to happen. He meditated once, and it happened. Done. The idea that you have to do something to get there is kind of crazy. On the other hand, if you don't do anything, it's not going to happen. You're going to be at that endless wedding. A horrible wedding. If you don't take charge of this in some way, if you don't say to yourself, "I want to change, I want to grow," that was Rudy's line, "I want to grow, help me to grow." What does that really mean, to grow? All of us tend to think that means you're going to be able to become an even better version of your ego-minded self. And there's no way to become a better version of it. All you can become is a bigger liar. Really. And who wants that? You'll be smoother, slicker, kinder, or not. You'll be all the affectations of a good person. But a good person isn't a put-on person. A good person is a real person. And sometimes a real person isn't good. They aren't even nice. They can be real miserable sons of bitches, but they're real. They really are what they are, who they are. They express the truth. When this guy told his father, "Oh, you'll never see me again if you keep going to that gravesite," that's not nice. But it woke his father up. Rudy used to yell at people like, just cut right into them. It wasn't nice, but that would help you start to shatter some of this crazy thickness and density that we all are. And that's what has to happen. For most of us, the awakening process, the arrival at truth, is a slow stuff falling away. It falls away, it falls away, it falls away, until there's just that much left. And you can describe it as like the last strand in a little baby's tooth when you pull it, or a candle about to go out. It goes, and then you're just in truth. And what truth is, really, is that there's no ego mind there interpreting you to you. There's nothing else out there describing life and putting you in some story mode. There's just what is. I've begun calling it the elemental. There's just the elemental truth of you. And you, at this moment, may be a complete, absolute, cosmic truth, but you're also a body, you're also a mind, you're also a person, you're the whole thing. You're the whole thing. You've always been the whole thing, but you're not separate in any part from anything. You're not separate from any other person, you're not separate from the buildings out there, the water and the Hudson going by just below. You're not separate from that. That is what you are. You are all of that. We are all of that. There is one singularity, and this is that. This is it. And it feels like this. It feels like this right now. That's what it feels like. It doesn't feel like, oh, sweet bliss and beauty and perfection. It has perfection and sweetness and bliss, but it has all the shit as well. It's the whole thing. And when you see and feel and are the whole thing, what's so interesting is that you don't judge one as being good and one as being bad. You don't see it as being partly this and partly that. It's all one thing. And you don't seek out one part of it over another part of it. Why should you do that? Because it is what it is. And then you're just that. You're just that. And will you be a human being who's escaped from the suffering of the world? No. You'll be a human being who's one with the suffering of the world. A human being who's one with the love of the world. And you will walk around in a state of unbelievable appreciation. When I was a kid and my mother said, death is going to sleep and you never wake up. And all I could think of when she said that was, you mean I'll never smell the coffee downstairs again? I couldn't bear that idea. The idea never ever to have a smell of coffee wafting in my nose and waking me up. And I can't tell you whether you'll ever have another smell of coffee waking you up in the morning. But if you have it now, you have it. The whole idea, the whole reason for this manifestation, honestly, is to smell the coffee in the morning. To look in each other's eyes. To have friendship. To have love. To have joy. To have terror and suffering. To touch the mystery, the enormous mystery of being. That's the whole purpose of this. And you want it because you're here. You wanted it so badly that you came into being to touch life, to touch the world, to touch being. And that's what we've done. That's what we're doing right at this second. This is the moment of truth. The next second will also be the moment of truth. And you may not recognize any of them if you're not looking for it, or if you're not available to it, or if you're not hungry for it, or if you keep yourself in a puppet mode and just distracted by. You don't want that. None of you are in this room because you want that. So, I will tell you, this discussion with this fellow on the airplane was so beautiful, so unexpected, so perfect. And what it has done for me, among other things, is that he explained to me living through my worst fear. And he was sitting there as a beautiful human being, a truly beautiful human being. Not awakened in his terms, he has no words for that. He was just a beautiful human being. And he taught me that you can live through anything. And the gift of that is enormous. So you can hear that from somebody. I'll tell you, you can live through anything. You can live through your worst fear. But don't avoid your worst fear. Don't try not to live through it. That's the mistake. Don't try to avoid the thing that is the most painful or the most terrifying. Because the only way into truth is through it, not away from it. Most of human beings are living away from it. Running from it, in fact, as fast as they can. It won't get you there. And the there you're trying to get to, the there you're trying to get to is right here. And I can tell you that now week after week after week, and I can try 4 million different ways of saying it, but it will always come down to that. The thing you're looking for is right here. This is the moment. This is the truth. This is reality. It's nowhere else. It will never be anywhere else. Wake up. Any questions?
Do you have any idea what happened to the guy who possibly spent the last $90 in his bank account?
It was actually a woman. Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, no, she was wonderful. She started, I don't know how she started this, but she started selling things at, what are those called? Where you go,
Exposed.
well, no, where you go,
Street market.
street markets, yeah.
It wasn't me, was it?
Pardon?
It wasn't me.
No, it was
Okay.
Jane Breswell was her name.
Okay.
The question was, what happened to the woman who spent her last $90?
Oh, right.
And she started going to the they had them at the Rose Bowl and all these different places.
Flea market.
Flea markets. Thank you. She started selling things at flea markets, and she made a fortune. She ended up moving to Paris and continued selling in flea markets. And you know, you're not going to starve to death. I mean, and if you do starve to death, well, that's your truth. But it doesn't happen usually. There's so many other things that can happen. And it means you've got to speak to people. You've got to tell people, I have no money. I am completely broke. I am completely without help. And then you speak the truth. And people will look at you like, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Oh, too bad. I hope you find something. Or they'll say, well, I have a spare room. Come with me for now. And then something else happens, and something else happens. But from that point on, you're not living the lie. You're living where you're at. And I'm telling you, living where you're at broke is better than not living where you're at rich. Anyone else?
Can you keep this apartment a little longer?
No. I actually tried, but it's already rented to somebody else. And it's time for me to move out of New York. You know, I may be back. I have no idea. I literally have no idea. I walk around in a state of not knowing, and it's not terrible. You know, also, I learned this in India many years ago. I mean, I once, you know, some Peace Corps people took us into this glorious house. They had a cook. They had fed us for days, and it was wonderful. The next day, they said, you know, it's time for you to leave. And I was sleeping in a field. You know, that night, I went from this glorious bed with a cook to a field in a sleeping bag. And I went, this is life. This is how it goes. You know, you can't have, it's going to keep changing. And it changes for everybody. And if you're open to one and then the other, it's all magical and amazing. But if you're always holding on to the thing that was, then you're going to live in the past and suffer. And for what reason? Because you're not present. And I understand it. And the lesson of that is, take it as it comes. And there's a beauty in each moment. There really is beauty in each moment if you're willing to not compare it to everything that was. And all that does, the comparing, is the computer ego mind. That's all it does. And it keeps trying to say, well, you used to have this, and you should do that, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you're the victim of your own computer mind. Everybody is. And so mostly you can't turn it off, but you can come to a point of such focus and stillness that the computer mind, it's over there, but it's not digging in.
I have a spare room.
You have a spare room?
You and Blanche needed.
Thank you. But it might not be me and Blanche. Understand that. You know, you might think that's a great thing, but what if it's somebody who's truly not quite as interesting? You know, you have to be careful. But if you can really make that offer to the world, you will attract something that might actually be challenging, but the path to exactly what you're looking for. If you operate out of kindness, compassion, and truth, you will get in kind. Okay?